Welcome all of you. I shall be continuing my class of TB with the components of treatment. So in the previous classes, you know the pathogenesis of TB, the classification of TB, and the algorithms pertaining to pulmonary TB, extrapulmonary TB, and pediatric TB. You also know the case definitions and what can be the outcomes. Now I am coming to the next important part, that is the treatment of TB. So we have classified the patient. Now we want to treat the patient. So what are the goals of treatment? All our treatment has got some goals because we want to have some measurable achievements so that we can say what have we done and what have we not been able to do. So the goals of treatment are render the patient non-infectious, break the chain of transmission and decrease the pool of infection. That is number one. Number two, decrease case fatality and morbidity by ensuring relapse-free cure. Number three, minimize and prevent development of drug resistance. So, the strategies for treatment of TB have got some scientific basis. It would have been very nice to talk in details about the evolution of strategies, but this is not possible in this very small scope of the class. So, I am just telling you about the four components. The first component is domiciliary treatment. Previously, you may have seen that TB was used to be treated in sanatoriums. People were isolated from their near and dear. They were kept in a particular place called a sanatorium and they were treated there. In around 1950, by a series of studies firstly in Europe, then in USA and then in India, it was found that domiciliary chemotherapy was as effective as sanatorium treatment. Studies in India have shown that smear-positive TB patients treated as domiciliary disease have achieved high cure rates as good as those when treated at sanatorium, besides having other social benefits of being at home. So, treatment is domiciliary. Now about short course chemotherapy. Why short course chemotherapy? We have got a lot of antibiotics in our armament now, though they are running out fast. So that is a very grave situation. Anyways, if we can hit the TB bacilli with many antibiotics together, then it is possible to reduce the duration of treatment, especially because of rifampicin and pyrazinamide. And treatment regimen of 6 months given daily has been found to be effective and achieve high cure rates, prevent emergence of drug resistance and minimize relapses. Also, you must remember that the shorter the treatment regimen is, the more chance the patient has to adhere to his treatment. Thus, short course chemotherapy regimens of 6 months are recommended internationally for most forms of extrapulmonary TB. So, for this treatment regimen, there is some bacteriological basis. Now, in an untreated smear-positive pulmonary tuberculosis patient, there are naturally occurring translocation mutants to different drugs at different frequencies. The larger the bacterial population, higher is the probability that the resistant mutant strains are present. The number of bacilli is lower in smear-negative and extrapulmonary lesions. The number of viable bacilli commonly found inside the cavities, sized about 2 cm in diameter, on an average is likely to be in excess of 100 million. So, among this amount of bacilli, there would be an appreciable number of mutant resistant to any single drug before the start of the treatment that are capable of multiplying and will not be affected by a single drug, that is isoniazid. This accounts for treatment failures observed with monotherapy of patients harboring large number of bacilli. Thus, if 2 or more drugs are given concurrently in the initial intensive phase when the bacterial load is high, the chances of survival and selection of drug-resistant organism to any drug would be very small, as mutant resistance to one drug, as a rule, susceptible to other and vice versa. That is the basis of use of multi-drug therapy. I am giving a very simple example. Suppose for drug A, the chance of having a mutant is 1 in 10 to the power of 5. for drug D it is 1 in 10 to the power of 3. So for drug A and B, by simple law of probability, it will be 1 in 10 to the power of 5 into 1 in 10 to the power of 3, that is 1 in 10 to the power of 8. So if you charge the bacilli with 4 drugs, it will be a very less chance that a mutant strain is existing in the bacilli pool. So here there are some bacilli which are intra and extracellular, which there are some bacilli which are extracellular rapidly multiplying. There are some bacilli which are extracellular intermittently multiplying, and there are some dormant bacilli sitting in a very comfortable zone. They are the most hard to hit. So this, in the intensive phase, the 4 drugs HRSE, isoniazid, rifampicin, streptomycin and ethambutol, they will, 4 of them will be targeting the bacilli and cause a rapid decrease of bacilli count. Next, the extracellular intermediate multiplying bacilli will be cured mostly in the continuation phase, mostly by rifampicin. So rifampicin has to be continued in the continuation phase. Also, for the intra and extracellular slowly multiplying bacilli, Z or pyrazinamide is the drug of choice. So this is also to be continued. For the dormant bacilli, we do not have any particular drug. So let us come to the drugs. Anti-TB drugs will have early bactericidal activity, sterilizing activity, and ability to prevent emergence of drug resistance. Among them, isoniazid is a potent drug exerting only bactericidal activity, preventing emergence of drug-resistant mutants. Rifampicin is a potent bactericidal drug and also a sterilizing drug on semi-dormant bacilli, which multiplies intermittently. Pyrazinamide is also a bactericidal drug and a sterilization drug in semi-dormant bacilli multiplying slowly. And ethambutol is an effective bacteriostatic drug, helpful in preventing emergence of resistance to other companion drugs. Okay. So, with this scientific background in mind, we have been able to make the treatment regimen as short as possible and as simple as possible. We now use FDC or fixed dose combination. Why? Because FDC has got several advantages over conventional chemotherapy. The FDC, the adherence will be better, the bill burden to the patient will be better, it will be easier for inventorying or supplying, and it will be also easier for the supervisor to supervise the treatment. So we only give FDC to the patient. Okay. Now there is two types of FDC. For adults, there can be either 4-FDC, which is given in the IP, consisting of HRZE, or there can be 3-FDC, given in CP, consisting of HRE. Just remember 4-FDC and 3-FDC. 4-FDC is given in IP and 3-FDC is given in CP. So in case of pediatric patients, remember dispersible 3-FDC consisting of HSZ and dispersible 2-FDC consisting of HR. Okay. In pediatric patients, ethambutol is not given because of there can be color blindness and retinal toxicity which the patients will not be able to elicit. Now I am coming to another very important part, which is known as the guidelines for sputum collection. There are a lot of discussions on FDC, but what I would like to mention that there can be several treatments for pediatric patients, there can be doses for adults and child. You can go through them. I am not discussing them here because they are mostly informative. So I am coming to another important part which is often asked in your viva, and you also have to remember these things for your clinical practice. That is how to collect sputum in case of a TB suspect. So there are two sputum collections, as you all know, in TB. One is spot and one is morning. Whenever the patient comes, you will give the patient a sputum collector to collect the spot sputum, give him a collector to collect the morning sputum on the next day. What shall be the advices given to the patient? The patient has to cough out on a open space where there is aeration, otherwise there can be infection from the patient. There shall be no persons in front of the patient. He will have to take a deep breath, inhale a deep breath, and then cough as forcefully as possible. In many cases, it can be such that the patient will cough out saliva instead of sputum, and that can give rise to a false positive test because of the commensals present in the saliva. So for that, the sputum has to be carefully seen so that the patient is coughing out properly. Okay. There can be also advices given to the patient regarding disposal of sputum, like the patient can dip the sputum in a water which is treated with bleaching powder or lime so that the bacilli may die. He cannot throw the sputum here and there indiscriminately. So these guidelines are now discussed. Now regarding sputum reporting, I am just coming to a particular point, that this is a reporting guideline of the sputum. If no AFB is found in 100 oil emulsion field, it is known as 0. If 1 to 9 AFB is found, it is known as scanty. If 10 to 99 AFB is found, it is known as 1 plus. If per oil emulsion field 1 to 10 AFB are found, it is known as 2 plus. If more than 10 AFB are found in per oil emulsion field, it is known as 3 plus. Now I am coming to a very important difference between latent TB infection and TB disease, a difference which is coming up as a very important part in TB control in recent updates. There can be patients who are having latent TB infection. Here there are no symptoms or physical findings suggestive of TB disease. Here TST or IGRA test can be positive because he is having TB but no symptoms. Chest radiography is typically normal. Also respiratory specimens and smear are culturally negative. They cannot spread TB bacteria to others. They should be considered for treatment for LTBI to prevent TB disease in later on phases. So in India, it is seen that 40% of the population for LTBI based on TST positivity is neither rational nor practical, so it needs a focused approach. In clinical situations, the most obvious group for LTBI treatment is again those patients who have got a higher chance of conversion from LTBI to frank TB, like those receiving long-term corticosteroids, immunosuppressants, HIV infected patients, etc. Now I am coming to some of the factors of TB with other morbidities. Firstly, I am discussing TB with HIV. The primary impact of HIV and TB is that the risk of developing TB becomes higher in patients with HIV. Overall, HIV infected persons have approximately 8 times greater risk of TB than persons without HIV infection. And as the CD4 count decreases, the chance increases. Retroviral treatment can substantially decrease the risk of TB, but the risk always remains higher than HIV negative patients. Similarly, tuberculosis is the most common opportunistic infection among HIV infected individuals and is a major cause of mortality. So, with this in background, HIV testing is done for all the TB patients. All the TB patients have to be sent for ICTC for HIV testing in your setup, and if in ICTC, from ICTC, all the patients have to be sent to the DMC for finding whether there is TB or not. Now, coming to the other important part, TB with diabetes. Again, like HIV, diabetes is a very common finding along with TB, and all diabetes patients should be checked for TB, and all TB patients should be checked for diabetes. But to be very frank, these diabetes patients have a weak immune system. The HIV TB collaboration has been quite well in India established, but the TB diabetes collaboration is not very well established in India. Okay, so the next point is TB with tobacco. In all patients of TB with tobacco, emphasis should be given on stopping of smoking. If required, nicotine replacement can be given. Also, TB and nutrition is a very important issue. TB causes malnutrition, and malnutrition predisposes a person to TB. So nowadays, in cases of TB, in many states there is often a nutritional supplementation which is given to the patients. That is, TB patients should be linked to some nutritional support system. Many NGOs are providing that. In some cases, the governments are also providing that. Also, TB and silicosis puts TB in a occupational disease perspective. So, in case of persons working in coal mines, in asbestos factories, etc., are highly prone to develop TB. So, they can be screened periodically as a high risk case. Now, I am coming to the next part, which is a very complicated part, but I am making it simple. In fact, if you want to go deep into drug resistance TB, you will have to go to the PMDT guideline, which is outside the scope of discussion in this class. So, drug resistant TB. Now, firstly, I am coming to the definition of drug resistance TB. There can be monoresistance of TB, a TB patient whose biological specimen is resistant to only one first-line drug. There can be polyresistant TB, a TB patient whose biological specimen is resistant to more than one first-line drug, other than both isoniazid and rifampicin. In case of multi-drug resistant, the specific term is a TB patient whose biological specimen is resistant to both isoniazid and rifampicin, with or without resistance to other first-line drugs based on the results from a quality assured laboratory. So, if it is isoniazid and rifampicin, then it is MDR TB. If it is not isoniazid and rifampicin combined, it can be polydrug if it is more than one. If it is only one, it is monoresistant. There can be only rifampicin resistance to rifampicin detected using phenotypic or genotypic methods, with or without resistance to other anti-TB drugs. Patients who have rifampicin resistance only should be managed as if they are on MDR TB case. Also, there can be extensively drug resistant TB whose biological specimen is additionally resistant to fluoroquinolone like ofloxacin, levofloxacin, or moxifloxacin, and a second-line injectable anti-TB drug like kanamycin, amikacin, capreomycin from a quality assured laboratory. Now, this is the flow chart of a drug resistant TB. So, who are the presumptive of a drug resistant TB? They can be either people living with HIV, all extrapulmonary TB, patients who are PR negatives or not very sure of the smear status with X-ray suggestive of TB, including pediatric and vulnerable population contact of DR TB patients. So, These are the presumptive TB cases, and all diagnosed TB patients, as well as all non-responder to treatment. You remember this failure of treatment, recurrent cases, etc. All diagnosed TB patients, all non-responders should be done as CBNAT. In CBNAT, if it is rifampicin resistance is detected, then you have to go for second line and first line LPA. If he is rifampicin sensitive TB, then only first line LPA is to be done. With first line LPA, it can be detected whether the patient is age resistant or age sensitive. If he is age sensitive and rifampicin sensitive too, then we shall continue him with the first line of treatment. But if he is age resistant along with sensitivity to rifampicin, we shall treat him as a age monoresistant TB regimen. We can also do him other culture sensitivity testing to see if it is not mono but polyresistant TB. Regarding the other arm, if the patient is fluoroquinolone and second line injectable sensitive, then we can continue with the shorter MDR or age monopoly regimen. And if he is fluoroquinolone and second line injectable resistance, we have to introduce him to the newer drugs according to the DST guided treatment. The newer drugs are bedaquiline and denamide. Okay, so this entire MDR TB is again a different ball game. So do not go into much depth of that because this is an absolute specialist subject. Just remember this flowchart. This will be enough for your sake. So these are the regimens. Just go through them once. Age mono or poly DRTB, that is age R resistance not detected and age resistance. The treatment regimen is LFX, R, E and Z. E is ethambutol, pyrazinamide, rifampicin. For MDR or RRTB, we can use a shorter MDR TB regimen, and that consists of MFX, kanamycin, amikacin, clofazimine, etc. Or we can also use a all oral longer MDR TB regimen that consists of betaquiline, linezolide, clofazimine, cycloserine, etc. Now, pyridoxine is to be given to all DRTB patients as per weight bands. So these are some of the do's and don'ts you have to tell a TB patient. Do's includes covering mouth with a tissue handkerchief or upper sleeve of your clothing while coughing, washing hand with soap and water. The room where the patient stays for a considerable time should be well ventilated. Any family member who develops cough should also follow similar cough etiquette. Don't includes do not cough and spit in the open. Do not close or obstruct your window to ensure proper ventilation. Regarding nutrition, they have to take complete meals inclusive of rice, roti, dal, vegetable. In the start of the treatment, there can be some nausea and stomach upset. They can consult their doctor for the same. Don'ts, they cannot stop or skip any meals. Regarding the side effect of treatment, I am not going into that area. Each of these drugs has got side effects and how to manage the side effects. If anyone is interested, they can go through the module. So I am ending my discussion here. In the next class, I shall be discussing about the TB program.